Time for us to talk about our main event on this one. The welterweight title is on the line. Kamaru Usman makes the third defense of his belt up against Gilbert Burns. Now I'm going to set the scene for a lot of people to try and just paint a little bit of a story here. Now back in September 2019, Gilbert Burns fought Alexei Kunchenko on the prelims of Fight Night Uruguay. 18 months later, 4 wins in a row, here he sits ahead of the biggest fight of his career against one of his old teammates, Kamaru Usman. Where do you stand on this one, John? Because this looks like it's very hard to get excited about Kamaru Usman fights, which we'll get into in a little bit more detail when we talk about him. But I have to say, I'm more intrigued by this fight than maybe some of the more everyday fans are.
I don't know. My excitement level is not too high. I think you might be a little more excited for it than me. I think you did a good thing by bringing up his welterweight run, Gilbert Burns' welterweight run. We obviously know he was a lightweight. He had a up and down career at lightweight, faced some losses earlier on in his career, but he started to battle back. He had nice wins over OAM, Mike Davis, but he moved up to welterweight, and he right away he fought two tough welterweights, Alexei Kunchenko, who was 20-0, undefeated at the time, and then Gunnar Nelson. And both those fights were 29-28 decision wins. They weren't the most dominant fights. They were close, competitive fights, but also clear wins for Burns. Then, of course, he knocked out Damian Maia in round one with that nasty left hook. He dominated Tyron Woodley. So I think that Burns has kind of had a favorable run to the title. He hasn't really run into too many difficult matchups. I mean, like Leon Edwards, for instance, would be a really tough matchup for him. Colby Covington would be a tough matchup for Burns. And he's kind of, even Masvidal would be tough. So he's kind of gotten his way around all those guys and is getting the title shot anyway. But I think the most telling fight when coming down to analyzing this fight is the Damian Maia fight. And even though Burns knocked out Maia in round one of that fight, I think we actually learned a lot more negatives about Burns than positives in that fight because we saw Damian Maia pressure Burns. Burns was moving back right away. He was getting stuck against the cage. Burns doesn't really have that footwork to keep himself off the cage. And I believe that was in the big cage as well versus Maya. So now we're in the small cage at the apex. He's going to have a small area, and he's going to have to avoid the pressure of one of the best cagecraft pressure fighters in the sport, Kamaru Usman. And really just seeing the way that Gunnar Nelson was able to pressure Burns, keep Burns against the fence. I mean, Gunnar Nelson put Burns against the fence for 5, 6, 7 minutes of their fight. And I just don't think that Nelson is anywhere near the caliber of Usman is. So just seeing those few couple of fights, seeing guys being able to pressure Burns, get his back up to the cage was really all I needed to see to know that Kamaru Usman likely does his thing here and puts Burns against the cage and just grinds him out like he does. So that's my introduction. I have some more thoughts, but I'll pass it back to you for now, Carl. What are you thinking initially here?
And I think as well, if you look at if you count his lightweight record as well, got outmuscled by Pezares in his first loss, which that's a win that hasn't really aged well. I think when it comes to Kamaru Usman, I just want to go through a list of some of the people that Usman's beaten in this run to the title. Jorge Masvidal, Colby Covington, Tyron Woodley, RDA, Damian Maia, and Leon Edwards quite early in his run. So he's beaten a who's who of great welterweight fighters. But and if he wins this fight, I believe he also breaks GSP's record for the most wins in UFC welterweight history. So when you look at this guy on paper, you think this guy potentially should be heralded as one of the great welterweights. Like he's up there in that sort of Matt Hughes, Robbie Lawler sort of realm. I don't think he's ever going to beat GSP in terms of grandeur. But that fighting style is so negatively received that I don't think he'll ever get the praise and the recognition he maybe deserves for it. Like a lot of people make the John Fitch comparisons when it comes to Usman. But this, to me, is just another example of that. Because Fitch was another guy who was just steamrolling everybody. 30-26 all the time. And all you ever heard was, John Fitch, so boring. Kamaru Usman, so boring. I even put a poll up to predict this fight and asked the people to post who they thought was going to win. And all the comments were just saying, I'm not going to bother watching this, or snoozeman by decision, something along those sort of lines.
Yeah, I mean, the disrespect is crazy that Usman gets. I mean, you really got to question where it all comes from. I mean, I honestly think there could be like a racial component to it because Usman is hated amongst fans. I don't get it. I mean, the guy he has great interviews. The way he beat Tyron Woodley in his interview with holding his daughter, he said, "I might not be the best wrestler, I might not be the best striker, but when it comes to mixing this shit up, I'm the best." I don't even know what he said. "I'm the best motherfucker at welterweight right now." I love that. I wasn't on the Usman train before that, but after seeing him cut that interview, I said, you know what? I'm a fan of this guy, and I mean his style isn't the most exciting, but it's just suffocating. It's technical. It's amazing control. And I think you really got to appreciate the intricacies of MMA to appreciate him. The way he clinches opponents, he controls them, he neutralizes them. I mean, he takes dangerous fighters and puts them against the cage and makes them pretty much worthless. And I find that entertaining to watch. I find it entertaining to see how he's able to just drain the will from his opponents. I mean, you saw Masvidal slowly lose that swagger, that aura that he has to him. He kind of was a bit cocky in round one. Masvidal might have won round one, but then slowly, Usman just sucked all that energy out of him and was able to defeat him pretty handily. So I enjoy watching him fight. I understand why some people don't, but I think you really got to appreciate every aspect of MMA to appreciate Kamaru Usman as a fighter.
I mean, as a fight fan, as somebody who does want to be entertained and want to see these wild brawls, I can understand Kamaru Usman isn't exciting television, but there's a point where you have to appreciate and respect the level of dominance that he's showing, and in my opinion, I think he's reached that. I think the big reason why I'm maybe more intrigued by this fight than what maybe you are is because of what happened against Colby Covington. Part of the reason Usman versus Colby turned out the way it did, and I have to be honest, if you go back and watch the 245 preview, I just crapped on that fight. I didn't think it was going to be any good at all. And it blew me away, and I hold my hands up and say I got that one wrong. But Usman versus Colby turned out the way it did because Usman was wary of Colby's grappling ability. He didn't want to take the chance and go to the ground with him and have Colby take advantage on the ground. But he knew he had the advantage when it came to the stand-up, and it turned into a brawl. And eventually what won that fight was Usman just having more power, Colby just being a bit pillow-fisted, and eventually those big shots wore Colby down. I bring this up because Gilbert Burns is a multiple-time jiu-jitsu champion. He is one of the best when it comes to fighting off his back. Could he maybe scare Usman into standing and trading again? And if it does turn into a stand-up fight, I think Gilbert Burns arguably has good enough, if not better, stand-up than Kamaru Usman does. And I know Usman started training with Trevor Whitman. I think he's tried to iron that side of his game out. But if it does turn into a stand-up fight, I think it becomes a lot more of a lottery.
Yeah, I agree there. Those are some good points. I think the striking will be very close. When they're at distance, I think it will be competitive. I think the fact that Burns is orthodox is going to make it more competitive because Colby was southpaw, and that kind of favored Usman, that open stance matchup. But you have Burns, who's orthodox, who's going to be able to throw calf kicks, and he has very good leg kicks, heavy calf kicks. And if Usman is pressuring him, he's going to have to be weary of those calf kicks. But the biggest difference in striking I see between these two guys is footwork and just ring craft. I think that Usman just knows where he is in the cage at all times. His feet are always underneath him. He's so calculated. And I just don't think that Burns has that same level of footwork and awareness when it comes to where you're at in the cage. And there's an article on the fight site about Usman's ring craft and just how much of an expert he is at getting his opponents to move in the direction where he wants them. And that's one of the best parts about Usman is the way he's able to use his striking to pressure his opponents to get to his grappling. He really transitions everything so well. So he's not the greatest striker, but the way he moves and the way he feints and how athletic he is just makes him really effective on the feet. And in terms of Burns' grappling credentials, he is an incredible jiu-jitsu player. He has multiple degree black belts. He's actually out-grappled in pro jiu-jitsu a lot of high-level grapplers too. But I just see it not really translating well here because what I've seen from Burns against the cage is just not good. The way it's more of a clinch defense than a grappling defense against Usman. You really have to defend the clinch and defend the body locks of Usman. And I just do not see Burns doing that. I see Burns getting stuck against the cage and Usman just riding him out there with that back clinch of his where he gets that body lock and will knee you in the thighs, stomp your feet, drag you down to the mat. And I don't see Burns having much success stopping that. So I don't think that Burns' defensive grappling, his jiu-jitsu will translate very well to this fight. And I don't think that Burns will have the footwork to really keep this fight at range for long. So I do think the distance striking will be close when it's there. I just don't see Usman giving him that range that he wants.
How much do you think training with Whitman's going to change Usman's fighting style?
I don't think a massive amount because he was training with Whitman for the Masvidal fight. It was supposed to be Burns. Obviously, Burns fell out, so we saw bits and pieces of what to expect. I don't think Whitman is going to vastly change him too much. I mean, he already got a championship coming or a champion level fighter coming to him. He's not going to let his ego affect him and try to change aspects of Usman's game. He's just going to fine tune what Usman has already done. So I don't think we see too many drastic changes. We just see a much more polished version of Usman, and we see why he's the best pound for pound fighter in the sport.